We are going to share the story of our class. And of course, Jacen will lead the way. But before I start, I want to say that we're very grateful for the opportunity to present our ideas here, and grateful to the Joel and UBCO studios, as well as we're grateful to be able to create these beautiful images that we'll share with you, and on unceded Okanagan Silks territory. And to begin, we will introduce the class and course objectives. Then Jacen will take over and talk about the research, development, and production aspects of it. After which we will reflect on learning outcomes and learning experiences, reflecting on specific aspects that relate to Jacen's work that was presented in the theater. And finally have closing remarks. So one day Joel came and said, we have this great space. What can you do in there? And that was such a fortunate opportunity for our class, because the advanced media class is really designed to provide experimental laboratory workshop type studio opportunities for students to create the artwork from the initial idea and through research and development to the final product. So when Joel and I talked first time, we saw what is a great opportunity for the class to have a real impact on the local UBCO community and be able to present their work. So we structured the entire class to work within that context. And I'm going to briefly go over the learning objectives. So it's really about refining self-directed studio practice. But of course, if you are designing an artwork or a media story, it's really important to have the real output, because that enhances the skills of critical and creative inquiry in the context of the public presentation. So we really were very fortunate to be able to produce our work in the public context, and even more importantly, in the public context of the university, because students live on the campus and there is a great community aspect building to it. And the students were extremely excited with the opportunity to show their work for their peers. I want to stress throughout our presentation, as you will see, as Jacen will discuss the process itself, we have this amazing technology and amazing opportunity, but it's really the humans who make things happen. People like Joel, who was such a champion in enabling us to access this fancy technology, which typically is not very accessible for the students, and give us the opportunity to be able to work. So with that, I will let Joel explain, with that, I will let Jacen explain our class process.
Cool. All right.
So, okay, well, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to play the video. Oh, there it is. All right. So we'll be playing the class work as we speak, because I think that's more engaging than seeing the words on the page. The first work we're showing, it's Losing Touch from Lark Spartan. Okay. And just make sure that the volume is down. And here we go, Jacen. You can have
All right, great. Thanks, Alex. So this was an upper level art production class. So having a little bit more specific integration of artistic medium and themes is important. So we did start the class developing small scale sketches, quote unquote, based on research from writings such as environmentalism, mental health, whatever concerns were interesting to the students, really. Then we had our first tour to the Sawchuk Family Theatre. This was more of a short tour to introduce us to the space and the specifics of the screen. Joel showed us a sample of work, and it became immediately clear just how large the screen was, and also just how public it was. So, you know, that makes a couple of the students kind of nervous, but this is kind of the story of how that is overcome and how we've all made these really great works. While the Sawchuk Family Theatre is in kind of like a cave of sorts, like a side room to the main hallway, it is very visible to the main hallway all the same. Essentially, the goal of the class, the goal of what the students would be making was very clear after this first tour. This was our canvas, this very large screen, and from that class forward, we started on creating prototypes, developing the beginnings of what would be the final work. There was a clear impact right away, in my opinion, of knowing the work was destined for this very public consumption and not just an like art building consumption, because we're very used to us as the fine arts students presenting our work in the FINA gallery, but having our work elsewhere on campus is very different. You know, that's a completely different audience. And the awareness of that changed the stakes of the class significantly. The work, it just becomes more than just being created for assessment by the professor, but it becomes sharing with a larger audience. As well, the experience of specifically creating work for a space, like a specific space, it's much more different than just creating work in a class separate from a specific space and then getting presented at the end in, say, a gallery space. Knowing the end goal very clearly allowed for the concepts and work prototypes to become more developed a lot faster than usual. Most students knew what they would be working on for the rest of the class by the end of the 5th or 6th week of class, if I recall correctly. Then we went to the development period from research. Every class we workshopped our work together in order to make it as strong as it could possibly be. This is usual in an art production class, but because this class was aiming for a single strong work in a single specific location by the end, there was a lot more iterative development. As a result, the works overall grew rapidly and were very strong. The one thing specifically I wanted to talk about was how the artwork created for a class that intends to exhibit publicly broadens the scope of the individuals. It created a high personal expectation for some students, and they rose to that challenge. The public situation of the screen raised the bar for the class. Having the specific early access into testing their work in the Sawchuk Family Theatre helped with meeting their work expectations. Thank you, Joel. This is where we'll come to the first prototype presentation. So this was the first time we'd actually put our work on the theater screen, and something became very obvious. Many of us were working in 1080p, which is HD, and we thought that would be enough, but no. The screen is 4K, and it was very obvious that it was just too blurry, too pixelated, even if we were in 1080p. So we had to be working in 4K. Thankfully, we had that initial prototype presentations about 5 weeks from the final submission presentation, which provided a lot of time to reconsider and fix aspects of the student work. As per the course outline, there was only the prototype presentation and then the final presentations, but you know, as a class, us students really wanted the work to be shown like as a second prototype presentation one more time just before the final in order to do some further troubleshooting. Thankfully, Joel was super duper accommodating and allowed for this to happen. There were further changes to students' work after that second prototype presentation. Overall, in this class, students were a lot more malleable to critique and feedback. The stakes were higher, so input was taken more seriously and utilized so much more efficiently and artistically. Then we were ready for the final presentation. By this time, the students had had the very valuable opportunity to play and present their work several times. So the final work that was presented worked perfectly for the immersive screen for the Sawchuk Family Theatre, including figuring out all the audio technical problems that there were. Overall, my classmates and I were so much more comfortable presenting this work on such a large public screen by the time the final presentation rolled around. No one was particularly nervous at this time. And that was really thanks in part to the full integration of this class with this specific space. And I'm gonna pass the mic over to Alex again, and she can talk about the learning outcomes and experiences of her class.
Okay, Jacen, feel free to jump in anytime you have something to add.
For sure.
As we go. So what this project really showed, or this collaboration, is that it's a kind of real world problem situation. So no matter which challenge we would encounter, whether it is the notion of resolution or the technology or the audio, we had a real world situation and high stakes to solve all the problems. So I think that's really valuable. And, but more importantly, enabling access to students to work on such a cutting edge technology is really preparing them for the future and for troubleshooting that this kind of technology requires to make excellent work. So I feel that we were able to really enhance our learning outcomes. But I also want to share one important point. In a class, sometimes we're looking at the bell curve. Some students do really good and some students don't do so well. The funny thing about our experience is that every student in the class created amazing work. So the quality of the work was exceptionally higher. In my experience as a teacher, doing this kind of work, this really made a big difference. Another thing that happened for students is that they were really proud of their work and the classwork. And they were really looking forward to exhibiting their work in this context. So much so that because the class created this work for this particular venue, everybody in the class agreed to have these videos as a part of the venue. So it's a really excellent collaboration. I wonder, Jacen, do you want to add something on the learning outcomes and enhanced experience?
Sure. When it comes to the learning outcomes, there were a couple students that had not really done a lot of digital media work before. So by the end of the final presentation, they had really gotten a lot of problem solving done, as in how they could transfer their traditional media skills into a more like appropriate digital media. And a large part of that was that iterative work with the screen. We do have an example. Oh, I think she already showed it actually. Adriana's the one with the charcoal pencil, the stop motion one. Like, you know, she was working really small all semester trying to do digital work, but at the end of the day, it came to, oh, let's just do a large traditional work and utilize that in digital media. And that was really successful at the end. And she was super happy with that.
Yeah, it kind of forced students to find their strongest point and then share that with the UBCO community. But I do want to reiterate, in this entire process, what was the most valuable was the interaction and the support we got from our media studios, specifically Joel, in being able to build that, because that's an iterative process. And it really served students' learning and ability to access this technology. So in the sense of, even though our learning outcomes were, or learning objectives were, to create media artwork from the beginning to the end, to the final production, in my experience, because of the cycle of being able to develop in the context of the public space and being able to present in the public space, the quality of the work was much, much higher. So I will, at this stage, allow Jacen to, what we were looking at, the last work we looked at was a seismic reversal by Jacen Dennis. And I would like Jacen to reflect a little bit on the work and what it meant to Jacen personally to develop for such a large work.
Yeah, if you want to play it again, that might be useful. We don't have to play it the whole way through again.
Okay, we'll play it as you speak. Okay.
Yeah, just so that you guys know what I'm referring to and stuff. So I guess a brief background on my work. As was mentioned by Joel, I'm an MFA student. Master's of Fine Arts, graduate student, and my work is deeply personal. As my research and artwork production, it directly deals with gender transition and the event of a familial loss early on in that. The idea behind seismic reversal is that my state of being in gender transition did not exist at the same time as my sister did, as she died quite early on in that process. The idea is that the cycles of life and death are in continuous motion, and that they, in this case, are simultaneous in both directions. So that's why it goes back and forth. So this is a really personal work. There is a tendency to present personal media small, but this is a reaction based in uncertainty and nervousness, in vulnerability. But you need to expand beyond that for both the sake of the artwork and the sake of the work's meaning in the world. And working large in public can really aid in that process of coming out of the proverbial artistic shell, if you will. Creating this work for the Sawchuk Family Theatre, large screen, immersive screen, basically propelled these concepts forward in a way more driven and concise way. You grow much more rapidly as an artist, in my opinion, when you must work large, but most importantly to the experience in this class, the ability to test the work consistently and try different formats was integral to develop the work in a way that had greater communication between the public art presentation and my intention. Originally, this work was 10 minutes long instead of 5, so it was a lot slower. But for the purposes of this class presentation, for the presentation on that immersive screen, the 10-minute version was way too slow and too subtle to be properly communicative with outsiders for the public viewership. Because you could walk by and you would not even notice that it was actually moving, really. The experience with the immersive screen, in this sense, was very helpful in the development of my thesis work, this specific work. And I'm just super thankful for the opportunity to play with this immersive screen. That's all I gotta say about that.
Okay. So we would like to play 2 other works that have a really strong audio. So yeah, let's play them first and then we can just conclude. Okay, and the last work. So for example, in multimodal landscape, Emerald Holt created all the animations as well as original music composition. So it's rather impressive if you think about a very short development cycle. And so to conclude, from our experience, it's really lovely to have the public spaces in university, that they're really important venues for sharing ideas and deeply meaningful. But the most important thing I feel, whether and how we judge the quality of the work, which from my perspective and my experience was much higher than in a normal, in a typical scenario where the public presentation is not there. The fact that we got access and support as a class is the most meaningful aspect of this experience. And both myself and the students were actually very happy and very proud of the results. So I'm very grateful to for this opportunity to work together. I'm really looking forward to doing more experiments after we get back into the physical space. As a matter of fact, some of the future work would include us developing potentially some of the interface, coding interface, to be able to maybe take these screens over and make an interactive artworks and see how far we can push as artists and developers, how far we can push the interaction with the big screen as such. Jacen, do you want to add any closing remarks?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds great. I mean, I know we've been praising Joel throughout here, but one more big thank you for him because he spent a lot of time with our class, like hours and hours helping us out. And that was really cool and very integral to the growth in allowing these students, myself included, to have the work on a really big scale for once instead of kind of smaller or just in the FINA gallery, for instance. So.
And unfortunately, I don't think the Zoom is cutting it to show this work. It's just a simulation of that real physical presence.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex and Jacen. That was a trip down memory lane. As we said, this was in 2019, and we were scheduled to do a reception and a showcase of all this work. And then unfortunately, due to some technical maintenance on the wall, as it was, we're still learning about it. We had to replace some panels, so that delayed it. And then we eventually ran into, I believe, holidays, and then some sort of pandemic kind of happened to slow down even further. So we really haven't had a chance to give this media the time that it really deserves in that space. But I hope to do that soon, and looking forward to upcoming opportunities to work in that space together. There are a few questions, Alex, if you and Jacen would care to maybe kind of answer these.
Sure.
The first one is, did the class collect and review feedback from the theater visitors? If yes, could you share some interesting and memorable comments?
Not really formally, but I feel that as we were hanging out in the corridor and showing the work, people would come by and would be impressed. So we got lots of great cheers from other faculty, from other students, but also from people in the library, because it was a real showcase of what we can do as a community, or at least a seed, if nothing more than that.
Yeah, nothing official, but there was a lot of people just hanging around on our final presentation day, not just because we had snacks on the table, but to actually look at the work too.
And laughing and being happy that the students, building for students and for the library. The library is the heart of university, so it's about the best space you can get the entire UBC community.
Has COVID changed the content of your creations? Has it pushed you in a different way, or are you staying mostly the same?
Not sure
well, we're discovering other modes of being, and like my current class, one of those third level classes in media, we're using JavaScript and open processing. So we're web only. We had great plans to develop tools to be accessing the media screen, and we were going to do this September and look at how we can take over the screens and create something even more immersive and interactive. But of course, now we're all in the web and JavaScript world. So yes, it did change, but the web is a kind of public space. So definitely change. And for that, it's really important to have the right tools to be able to develop as a class. So we have been using open processing environment to do some great development. But of course, it's all virtual. It's all virtual, and the physical contact and exploration as a group in the physical space is not something we do these days. Big change. We had to change the tools, we had to change the programs just to make things work for our experience right now. Yeah, big change.
Group gallery shows are a little bit more difficult to do right now, much less having the celebrations about, a class presentation. No more snacks.
But we still do interesting work. This keeps going. We're committed to that.
a couple more here. Like the 4K versus 1080p resolution, were there any other unexpected technical problems you had to overcome from artist to screen? What was that part of the experience like?
Audio was a big thing.
Which
To
I'll
create
just quickly, sorry, Alex, I'll just add to that question. There's a question, how is the sound heard in the space? Is it quite clear? So we can kind of field those together.
Yeah, well, that was a big challenge. And it's a challenge because I want to underline that each works that we've seen, or in the entire class, everybody decided to do individual projects. So it's rather impressive to see all these animations. They take a very long time. For anybody who's done animation, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But everybody was doing individual work. So dealing with managing the audio is challenge. It was very big a challenge, especially if the audio was musical. So for example, we couldn't hear the bass properly. And then some pieces, that's certainly something in this context that we can learn better, how beyond the 4K, how do we work with these individual audio files that may have slightly different requirements. But other than the 4K and tech and the audio, the surprise was just the presence of the screen. That was the biggest surprise and the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity. And it gave us the biggest excitement.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up the little, like the lines between the screens, because it's 16 screens, right? The lines are very minimal, but they are still there. And there was one student that, literally used those lines to segment different pieces, but then most of the other students, we have a piece that goes over the whole one and basically try to ignore those lines as best we can. So like there's kind of that aesthetic hurdle to overcome in terms of the lines, and making sure that the really important elements is not on the in-between of the screens, because some of that might get lost, such as text or other aspects like that. So I would say that was a technical hurdle.
Yeah, and as this was an early use of the space, we didn't know that audio was going to be a technical hurdle. And I mean, that's something that we're addressing in the next iteration of the space, is making audio tuned to the space. The fact that there's going to be people sitting there, the fact that it goes past the hallway, like that requires a different dynamic sound. So it is a growing room for sure.
And that's also what we need to discover, and what a better way to discover as a group and class troubleshoot. Not just that the audio is challenging in terms of the infrastructure, the media infrastructure, but also in terms of the production. It's something we can learn in terms of balancing multiple projects in a unified space.
Yeah. One last question, and this one is to Jacen. Do you find digital mediums easier or more effective when it comes to representing topics of gender identity compared to traditional mediums such as drawing or painting?
Yeah. Well, my master's research is literally about like animation and how that is an interface for exploring a redefined relationship between myself and my sister, as in the way that I am now, never existed at the same time as her. So that moving medium is very important to that relationship, because I can more easily explore ideas of cycles and growth and transformation. And I don't know if I would really have the ability to explore those same types of grounded in movement ideas with traditional medium. And personally, I love digital media, and I think that there's a lot of interfaces between different types of submediums. So like I can use video and draw on top of video, or I can use photography and you know, animate photographs. Yeah, so there's a lot of good little overlap there, and I just find that I am more expressive with the really subtle aspects of animation digitally rather than traditionally myself.
And sorry, we'll just do one more real quick here, but do you feel that such a large high resolution screen could facilitate interesting artistic collaborations? Example, imagine several individuals each had a tile of the screen and was given perhaps touch points at the four borders where they could interact with one another's tile, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that would be cool. I think that there is a little game that some teachers are doing with Zoom, because you know, Zoom have all the panels, and so you can have little games between the screens on Zoom, and that's like almost an early iteration of that. So yeah, that's super fun.
Yeah, it is a remarkably Zoom-like. So who knows what kind of work students will do after our pandemic experience. So the little squares gain just whole new meaning for us.